Camera. So we are in Deuteronomy, and we are in 19 through 24. We also are reading Psalms 20 and 21, which I love it when y'all read it and personalize it, because there's some good stuff in Psalms always, of course. I don't always look through it, but in Psalms 20, may the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. May he remember, verse 3, all your offerings. May he grant you, verse 4, your heart's desire. May we shout for joy over your salvation. So this is great when somebody is just accepting the Lord, and it's cool that you can kind of read the Psalms to them at the same time. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. Pray to the Lord. Make sure if you're going through anything, now that you're his child, pray to him, let him answer you, and give you your heart's desire. And you can talk about how your heart will line up with God in what it is that you do desire. And now I know, verse 6, that the Lord saves his anointed. That's us. It was David. He will answer him from his holy heaven. Yes, he will. I was playing a song earlier for Diane, and the Lord does answer prayer. I mean, he, just talking about at church Sunday, how Doug and I had an issue on Saturday night, and went Sunday morning, and the Lord just right out there and answered it, and took it away. And then in 21, oh Lord, in your strength, the King rejoices. I put my name in there in 21 as I read it. Oh Lord, in your strength, Trish rejoices. And in your salvation, how greatly I exalt. You have given me my heart's desire, and have not withheld the request of my lips. And so I read it that way. I love that. I love 21 for that reason. You make me, verse 6, glad with the joy of your presence. I love that line. You make me glad with the joy of your presence. That's verse 6. I trust in the Lord, in his steadfast love, and be exalted. It's just a beautiful Psalms to read to yourself and put your name in there. And then don't worry about your enemies, because God's going to take care of them. So hopefully, like I said, you are reading these and applying them to yourself, because they are great Psalms. Deuteronomy, we're in chapter 19. Again, Moses leading the people to the edge of the promised land, and Moses is going to die very, very shortly after this. So he is giving this new generation what they need to sustain themselves in the promised land. He's getting them prepared for the promised land. And out of a heart for his people, Moses just an example of, you're not going to go, but he could have gotten all like huffy about it or whatever, but he just had a heart for the Lord, and he had a heart for the people. And he stays, and he tells them everything that they will need in order to live a great life in the promised land. And as I mentioned, this is like sermons. It's like 5 sermons, that the book of Deuteronomy. And it's a love relationship between the Lord and Israel. It's also a love relationship between the Lord and us, because as we read these things, so many of them apply to us, and not exactly, because we're going back into ancient times and certain things that they had to do, but definitely apply to us in a lot of ways. Not to be saved, but that it might go well. And if this world had followed the Lord, if the United States had followed the Lord, we'd be a wonderful nation. We'd be strong, and not even with what he talks about with the murders and how all things are resolved, and not to personal property and everything. And if we would have followed that, we started out that way. That most of our laws came right out of the Bible in the beginning anyway. And then they just did like the Pharisees, and they started adding, taking away and moving things until it got ridiculous. And now we really don't have justice. So, but chapter 19, we're going to talk about 3 cities of refuge in the Promised Land. These cities are going to be centrally located. We've talked about them before, but we're going to summarize through them. The 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan have already been established. Matter of fact, Moses told us what the cities were, and now we're going to talk about, as they come into the Promised Land, the cities of refuge. So in verse 19, he says, when God cuts off the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dwell in their cities, verse 2, you shall set apart 3 cities for yourself. Verse 3, measure the distance, divide into 3 parts the area of the land of the Lord, that the Lord gives you, so that any manslayer can flee to them. Any man who has slain someone, manslayer, can flee to them. This is the provision for the manslayer, who by fleeing there may save his life. So if you kill your neighbor unintentionally, you didn't hate him. And for us, this is manslayer. Where do we get manslaughter from? Right there. Same word. And he gives an example. You're in the forest, you and your buddy, you're chopping trees, the handle flies off, hits him in the head, kills him. That's unintentional, and you can flee to a city of refuge. And the avenger of blood, the person who from the family of the man that was killed, has an obligation to find you and kill you, because you killed someone from their family. And every family had an avenger of blood, a goel. And in cases of murder, that's how they handled it. The avenger of blood would be free to kill you if you killed someone out of their family. So
is that G-O-E-L?
G-O-E-L, goel.
I've got it written several different places, so
Yeah.
I remember.
And so the city of refuge would be accidental. You flee to the city and you stay there until the death of the high priest. And the avenger of blood cannot come into the city and take you. And so he says in verse 8, if the Lord enlarges your territory and gives you all the land that he promised, provided you are careful to keep all this commandment, which I command you today, by loving the Lord your God and by walking ever in his ways, then you're going to add 3 more cities to these 3. So there'll be 6. But they didn't, did they? Lest innocent blood be shed in your land, and so the guilt of the bloodshed be upon you. Verse 11, if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait, attacks him, strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees into one of these cities, the elders of the city are going to send and take him from there, hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. You're not to pity him, and you're going to purge the guilt of innocent blood from the land so that it may be well with you. So these cities of refuge we talked about before. And they're a picture of Jesus. Cities of refuge are important in the Bible because they're a beautiful picture of Jesus. Jesus is our refuge. Psalms, who's got Psalms 46:1?
I do. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble.
So God is our refuge, the Bible says. These cities of refuge are a picture of Jesus. Both Jesus and the cities of refuge are to be within easy reach. And both are open to all, not just the Israelite, but a foreigner or whomsoever could also run to that city. What does Numbers 35:15 say?
Okay, but if the accused ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which they fled, and the avenger of blood find them outside the city, the avenger of blood may kill the accused without being guilty of murder. The accused must stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Only after the death of the high priest may they return to their own property.
So they flee to these cities, they stay there until the death of the high priest. Jesus, our high priest, died on the cross, took our sins from us. He is our refuge. We stay in him. We go outside of him, we're subject to Satan, right? And everything Satan has. And so both Jesus and the city of refuge are the only alternative for the manslayer. And without their protection, the person in need of the protection could be destroyed. And it's the same thing with us in Jesus Christ. That's why the Bible tells us to abide in Christ. When you're outside of Christ, you're subject to anything Satan wants to throw at you. Both Jesus and the cities of refuge provided protection within their boundaries. Outside being death. Who's got Numbers 35:26 through 28?
I got 35:25.
26 through 28. I think you read that one, Faith.
35:26-28.
Uh-huh.
You just read that?
Isn't that what you just read?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that goes along with that. And with both, full freedom comes with the death of the high priest. So 35:25. Who's got 35:25?
I do. And the congregation shall deliver the slayer out of the hand of the revenger of blood. And the congregation shall restore him to the city of his refuge, to which they fled. The accused must stay there until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the holy oil.
So full freedom comes with the death of the high priest. Our freedom is in the death of Jesus Christ, who is our high priest, right? He died on the cross so that we can be free from the penalty of death. So that is another way that the city of refuge in Jesus Christ it's a picture of the Lord. Love. And with both of them, there is a difference, right? Christ takes you when you're guilty. The city of refuge took you when you were innocent. Christ takes you when you're guilty. So, but cities of refuge, just remember, cities of refuge, a definite picture of Jesus Christ. Centrally located, easy to get to, protection within the within the walls of the city, death outside, and free for all. Deb?
Is it within each tribe that there's 3 cities of refuge? It's just the total promised land has three cities, right?
Yeah,
The
they
total
were,
of 3.
one was north, one was south, and one was central. They had one
Okay.
city in the north, one city in the south, and one in the middle. And they made roads, they cleared the roads to the cities. The cities weren't to be built either down in valleys or on mountains. They were to be level, so that whatever city the people were in, they would have clear access to the city of refuge, because it's a picture of Jesus Christ. No potholes, no stumbling things to get to the city of refuge. They made sure the roads were well maintained and that it was easy to reach. So a definite picture of Christ. Chapter 20. When you go out to war,
Numbers 35:15 says these 6 cities. When did the other 3 come into play?
The other 3, they didn't. There were 6. There was 3 on the east side of the Jordan and 3 on the west side. And he was saying, if you abide, if you are faithful and you're obedient and your land grows, you'll be doing 3 more. But they weren't, and they didn't, and so there wasn't. So there would have been 6 on the west and 3 on the east, but they never did. It's just been 3 cities.
I did see a map, I guess, in some of the studies, that there were 6 of them. Are you saying no,
There are
3 were not occupied?
no 3 were on the east side of the Jordan, and we named them Bezer or something. Bezer. I can't think of the name of the other 2. They were on this side, and they were for the tribes of Manasseh and the half tribe of Manasseh, Dan, and what was the other tribe over there? Anyway, the tribes that were on the east side, and then on the west side there were 3 cities. And he said on the west side, if you take all the land and if you obey me, then we'll be putting 3 more cities. But they didn't, and so the total is 6 altogether. Possibility of 9 if they would have obeyed, but they didn't. So then in 20 he talks about when they go out to war against their enemies and they see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid. The Lord your God is with you. And when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people and say, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. Verse 4 should be underlined, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you, to give you the victory. That's for all of us, right? I mean, Israel was and still is a small nation. And God did not want them to have horses or chariots. He told them not to accumulate them. And so he gives them a reason, even though they see that, to not be afraid, because God had already proven himself mighty in what he had done for them already. And he says, I'm out there. I'm with you. Don't be afraid, even though you see those things. I didn't let you have them, and don't be afraid of them. And the same thing in our life. Whatever you come up against, we battle things all the time. Sometimes we're battling high food prices right now. We're battling stuff, but God says, when you see that stuff, don't be afraid. I already know. I've already gone ahead and I give you the victory over it. And so then he puts the priests out. The priests tell him, encourages them to trust in God in a battle. The priests, the Levites, never went into battle, but they encouraged. That's what our pastors do. We're in an army, right? We're in the Lord's army, and the pastors should encourage you in your battles to trust in God. That's what they do. Same difference. And then verse 5, they have the officers speaking. Any man who here's some things in verse 5 through 9. If you built a new house, this is when you go into battle. You build a new house and you haven't go home. If you had just got engaged or married and you haven't been, go home. And God gives all these things, and then he says, even if you're faint-hearted and you don't want to go into battle, go home, because the size of the army isn't important to God, but the heart of the army is. And he doesn't want people in the battle that are going to be distracted thinking about, oh, I needed to be home, I didn't get to do that, or da 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 da, or that are scared and really don't want to go. That's not who God wants. God doesn't need them. And Israel was obedient in that, so it shows that Israel was trusting the Lord because they were obedient. But I think that's kind of cool. And when God calls, if there's a mission field of something or another, you know, I know I use this as an example often, but it's the only one I can think of. Sometimes it's like community outreach when we have groups that go out and knock on doors and stuff. It's like, you know, if it's not something that you feel comfortable with, if you're not called to do it, go home. Don't, that's not your thing. You know, God doesn't need a lot. He actually just needs one to do it, you know? But yeah, don't do what you're not, don't do what you're not comfortable with, because God will give you something. I don't want to say comfortable. None of that is comfortable, but you know what I mean. God will give you a calling that's all of your own, and
Your gifts.
yes, using your gifts. Yeah, but yeah, and there's a lot of people that go on mission trips that aren't called to go on mission trips. You will not be successful. You need to be called to go on a mission trip.
But you won't know it's your gift if you can try.
Yeah. You know, if you can go on a mission trip, if you can go on a mission trip in your area, you know, then you know that you'll be successful. You can see if the Lord wants to send you out. But I never went on a mission. It wasn't what I was called to do. Just wasn't. I supported many of them, but I, you know, it wasn't what I was, and I had thought about going to Africa. I was going to go to Africa. But you pray about it and you pray about it and you know whether you should go or not. Don't go just because you want to. But then, so the priests giving them some encouragement, and then God, after all of that, then God commands leadership for his army. And we have leadership that is over us. When we go out, we have leadership.
Having troubles.
Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, Carlene. Oh, yeah, Suzanne. There she goes. She's got it.
Interference.
Interference. Oh, okay. And then verse 10, when you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace. So here God is giving them a normal battle procedure. It's in general, this is what you do unless God specifically tells you otherwise. You ask them, offer them peace. If they say yes, great, you know, they become forced labor. If they don't, then God says kill the males, because any surviving male would be an enemy. And so they would be, if they want to battle, then they, God would give them into their hand and they would kill the males. Because again, that's the deal. When somebody kills you or somebody in your family, back in those days, you went after them, period. And so it makes sense because that's what they would do. They would go after the Israelites. And then in verse 16, but in the cities of these people that the Lord is giving you for inheritance. So in the promised land, when you go in there, you shall save alive nothing that breathes. You shall devote them to complete destruction. And then he says, Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices. And so you sin against the Lord. So in the promised land, they were to completely destroy everything because this was a unique battle of judgment. This was God using Israel to judge these people. They had been the way they were for, I think it was 400 years or something. they were the ones offering their kids to Moloch and all that. Not, they would not repent. Yes, they knew who the Lord was, but they did not repent. They were abominable, detestable, and all of their practices revolved around sexual immorality, and again, giving their children into the fire. And so God judged them. That's unique.
I got
And-
a question about
Mhm.
that. Verse 14, the women, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder which the Lord your God gives you.
Mhm.
Then does God approve of slavery and promiscuity? Because if he gives them the women, what do you think the men are going to be doing?
No. Number
He's
one,
giving a human being, saying, "Hey, they're yours."
number one, these are not the cities in the promised land, they're the cities outside. Number one, he offered them peace first. Okay, if they are not peaceable and they reject your offer, then you go to battle, and then you have the people that are there. They're going to be, it says forced labor, but they are going to be, yes, working in your home. They'll be servants and things like that. They won't be killed. They'll be taken care of. Their livestock and those things are wages for soldiers. We pay our soldiers. They didn't have a way of paying their soldiers, so they took the booty. God down the road, God is going, as we're going to read, he has specific orders on how to treat anyone that you take into your home.
Yes.
And he is very protective of them. You can't just have a slave and act like but the slaves weren't slaves like we think of slaves today, like the black slaves or even the Jewish slaves. They were servants and they were treated very well. And the plunder is the wages of that. So he's very, very, and God definitely knows what he's doing. Sometimes we are too complacent with sin, and because we have, we have a heart, but you can't be complacent with sin either. It gets you in trouble. And he said he doesn't want them to teach the Israelites all their bad stuff either. You remember Solomon? Solomon had how many wives? 700 what?
Yeah.
Wow.
They
Forgotten.
taught him how to disrespect the Lord, how to worship other gods. Solomon got in big trouble because he didn't listen to the Lord. The Lord knew what he was doing. But and then it talks about when you besiege a city for a long time in order to take it, not to destroy its trees. You can eat from them. You can cut down the ones that don't have fruit because you need to build the ramps to get into the city, but don't cut down the ones that you have fruit on. In other words, don't do anything you don't have to do. Don't do anything you don't have to do. Same with the battle. If they're peaceable, great, but if they're not, but don't do anything you don't have to. Don't go in and conquer and slay people that you don't have to. And then chapter 21, if in the land someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it's not known who killed him, verse 2, your elders and judges shall come out, measure the distance to the surrounding cities and the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man. They take a heifer, basically a virgin heifer that has never been worked and that has not pulled a yoke, and shall bring the heifer down to the valley with running water, a valley which is neither plowed nor sown. They break the heifer's neck there in the valley. And then verse 5, then the priest shall come forward, for the Lord has chosen them to minister to him and bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word, every dispute and every assault shall be settled. Verse 6, all the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer and testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Verse 8, accept the atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed. Do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. Unsolved murder. Who's got Numbers 35, 33, and 34?
Do not pollute the land where you are. Bloodshed pollutes the Lord, and atonement cannot be made for the land on which blood has been shed, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites.
It's his land, he dwells there. If innocent blood is spilled, what's interesting here is that the city, the town closest, and we do that today, we establish jurisdiction over a murder, even today. But the town closest is the town that needs to investigate, do all the investigation to try and find who did this murder. Once they have exhausted everything and they still don't know, and they've held nobody accountable, then they have to get this heifer, and blood has to be spilled for the land, and the town is held responsible for the murder, and they have to do atonement for the town. It's not for the murderer. You're not atoning for the murderer. You're atoning for the town, because the town sort of like let it happen. They weren't diligent. They weren't looking out for, but they have to atone for the blood of the unavenged murderer. And as you read it, God says it defiles the land, and there has to be a cleansing. And it's interesting, as we read farther down here, when they talk about a gal that gets raped, and how, in the city, if she cries, if she's in the city, it's her fault she doesn't cry out. The town is responsible, because in the town, they are responsible for what goes on in their town, who's there, what they do, and they have to make atonement for themselves. If each town was held responsible today for the citizens in it, we would be we'd be a better town. We'd be a better town. We'd all be aware of each other. And of course, it would be whether or not you were walking with the Lord or not. But I thought God had a good idea here. Verse 10, when you go out to war and the Lord gives them into your hand and you take them captive, speaking of the people, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, you desire to take her to be your wife, not just be with her, but to be your wife. You bring her home, she shaves her head and clips her nails. She takes off the clothing that she was captured in, and she would put on a tunic of an Israelite woman tunic, and remains in your house. She laments her father and mother a full month, and after that, you can take her as your wife. She would be your wife. But if you don't delight in her, verse 14, you can let her go where she wants. You can't sell her for money. You can't treat her like a slave, since you have humiliated her. So they have a month under the same roof. He has a month. If he thinks he would like to marry this lady, he has a month under the same roof. She meets the in-laws. She's shaven her head. I mean, he sees her in the most unbeautiful way, and if he still loves her, her hair is shaven, but it's getting rid of the things that the pagans taught her, and all. And she's very simple. She's shaven head, her head is shaven. If that man still sees her like that, and then still loves her, still wants to marry her, it'll be a strong marriage, right? He's seen her in the most limited, raw and limited way. And so it's a test of whether you really, because God holds this really important. Do you really want to marry her? You're a month there. She meets the in-laws. he meets, he sees how she is in the household as she's there. They have no intimate relations during that month, but they really get to see whether they want to be with each other or not. And if after that time he decides he does not, she gets to just be free. She goes and does what she'd like. He can't sell her. He can't do anything. God has protected her. And so it's interesting. She is purified and humbled. She makes a break with her past, and she has to also have a willingness to start this new life. If she's unwilling, he's not to proceed. She needs to be a willing participant in all of this. And she changes her allegiance. She becomes a child of Israel here. She mourns any issues she's got in her heart there when she's, anything against him, she's mourning, getting rid of it. And it's a I think it's a great way to have our marriage, except we can't live together for a month.
Can't you if you don't do anything?
No.
It's
But,
not a bad example.
Oh.
Yeah, you don't want. Yeah. But I mean, he's
Trish, I wonder what would happen if the,
if the what?
I wonder what would happen. I wonder what would happen if that woman wasn't so willing to give up her own religion for his and be some kind of not cooperative,
Right.
I mean, you
Well,
wonder if that, I mean,
Yeah, if it's been after the month, then she's just free to be she's free to do whatever she wants. She's actually become like an Israelite then by that time. If it's before the month and she's unwilling, then he's not to proceed. He's not to do any of that. And she would just be a servant, period, not to be his wife. She would just be a servant. But yeah, I guess
In his
sometimes
household though?
it's paid to be pretty, huh?
In his household? In his household?
In his household or in somebody else's household, it could be any.
So it's not necessarily she has to stay there.
No, she didn't have to stay there.
Okay.
Yeah. But God protects them, the women that have a willing heart. Here's a woman that has a willing heart to be humbled and to become an Israelite, because she sees that they will protect her, take care of her, that the Lord will be. Ruth and Boaz is a good, Ruth is a good kind of picture of that too. When she said, your God will be my God, and where you go, I'll go. It's like that. And then they actually become like an Israelite. And from then on, they're treated the same as an Israelite woman. So, and then it talks about if a man has two wives and you love one more than the other one, the firstborn son of the one that you don't love, you still have to take care of them. They are still your firstborn, and you still are required to give them the double portion that the firstborn gets. You're not allowed to. Reminds me of Leah and had that battle that they had with children, right? But you're not allowed to love one more than the other, or monetarily speaking, that you're not allowed to give the blessing to anyone but the firstborn. God just knows our heart, and he knows what we would have a tendency to do. And so he takes care of that. Firstborn is firstborn, period. And no preferences. God doesn't take preferences in us.
But Abraham had a firstborn with that handmaid or whatever, and then
No,
But
he
Sarah-
wasn't supposed to do that.
Right. Sarah was the one that had the promise from God with her son. The handmaiden was not his wife per se. And and that was,
They were trying to speed
God.
up what God told
Well,
them.
yeah, I know, I remember
Yeah.
the story,
Yeah.
saying that kid was actually the firstborn.
but God did give him,
Yeah.
yeah, God did take care of him. God did give him everything. And he,
I've read that from those two people, Jacob and Ishmael, is the tension between the
Absolutely.
Jews
Yeah.
and the Muslims.
that is the Arab
Because-
nation and
yeah,
the nation of Israel,
yeah.
Jacob and
Somebody
Ishmael.
stole the-
Yeah, that's where and they will always be.
Yeah.
Nobody can solve that until God
Right, exactly.
puts it away. And then he says,
Yeah, really.
yeah, because the firstborn receives a double portion, and so that God takes care of that. And then in verse 18, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey, doesn't obey his father or mother, they're going to take hold of him, bring him to the elders at the gate, and they're going to tell the elders that their son is stubborn and rebellious. He won't obey. He's a glutton. He's a drunkard. And in verse 21, all the men of the city shall stone him to death. Purge the evil. All Israel shall hear and fear. So this is a son past the age of accountability. This is not a young person. This is a guy who's going to set himself in rebellion to his parents and to everybody else. Obviously, he's not following the Lord. And if the elders determine that he is like chronically rebellious, shall we say, then they stone him. But the elders had to make the judgment, not the parents. The parents could bring the accusation, but the elders had to determine whether, and the elders were following the Lord, and they would determine. So purge the evil. These are things that, these were tribes that are now becoming a nation, and as a nation, they needed to be strong. They needed to follow the Lord. They needed to not have a bunch of stuff that they were dealing with. God said, you're not going to deal it. You're going to cut it right there. It's done. And we're going to keep people. We never read in the Bible of this ever happening. So it probably was a good deterrent, right? You never read about a son being brought up and being stoned to death. So I think that probably just never happened because they knew it would. And,
Well, kind of like in other countries that would cut off your hand if you stole something. It kept the crime rate down.
yeah.
It's too bad we don't hold those things here.
Yeah. Yeah, God, as we've said before, God doesn't play. And he calls out sin, and it needs to be taken care of. It needs to be taken care of immediately. We have a weird sense of justice. And in 22, if a man has committed a crime punishable by death and he is put to death and you hang him on a tree, and this is prophetic, his body shall not remain all night on the tree. Bury him the same day. A hanged man is cursed by God. And, having your corpse left exposed to shame for them was worse than death at the time. So even if someone was worthy of hanging on a tree, the humiliation was not to be excessive. And it's prophetic because Christ was hanging on a tree and he was cursed by God. There was that moment when he took all of our sin on him. He was cursed by God. And so it's very prophetic.
Because many of the people that they crucified took days to die, and they would just leave them on the road on their cross.
Yep. And he tells them, who's got Galatians? Did I give somebody Galatians?
3:13,
Uh-huh.
14. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. He redeemed us in order that the blessing given to Abraham might come to the Gentiles through Christ Jesus, so that by faith we might receive the promise of the Spirit.
So it is written from Deuteronomy, everyone that's hung on a tree is accursed by God, as Jesus took our sins so that Gentiles can be saved. I love it. 22, you shall not see your brother's ox, sheep going astray and ignore them. If he doesn't live near you and you don't know who he is, you bring it home stay with you until your brother seeks it, then restore it to him. Do the same thing for anything that he loses. You shall not see your brother's donkey or ox fall down and ignore it. Help him to lift them up again. This is the sin of doing nothing. Do you know a sin of omission? You can have a sin of commission when you sin against something God tells you not to do, but you can also, there is a sin of omission. God says if you see something and you don't do anything about it, it's a sin. And sometimes we forget that they brought that up a few years back when the kids used to get in fights at school, and they'd all circle around and watch the fight going on, and somebody was really beating up on one of the other kids, and they just stood there, and some of them were filming it, and they didn't do anything. Well, that's a sin. And so that God doesn't want that. It's a sin of omission. And help your brother, help your sister if if you find something and you keep it until they recover it. Verse 5, a woman should not wear a man's garment, nor a man put on a woman's cloak. Whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. This is a command against trying to look like the opposite sex. This does not mean we cannot wear pants. In those days, none of them wore pants. If you remember, in those days, the women wore long, and the men wore a dress type affair also. So that's not what it's talking about, but it's talking about a man attempting to look like a woman and a woman attempting to look like a man. It is an abomination to the Lord. So you got to call it like you see it. It is an abomination. If you come across a bird's nest, little ones in it, you let the mom go. You can take the eggs and stuff, to eat whatever, but you let the mother go. So talking about kindness to animals here. And mama will have more eggs, more babies, but you don't hurt mama. And then in verse 8, when you build a new house, make a parapet for your roof. This is a railing. And if you don't put a railing on your roof and somebody falls off of it, the guilt goes on your head because God told you to put it up there. Simple thing to think about, but the Lord knows, the Lord thinks about it. They had those flat roofs and they did a lot of stuff up there. So God told them they had to have a railing up there. Don't sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited. Verse 10, don't plow with an ox and a donkey together. Don't wear cloth of wool and linen. Don't make yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you cover yourself. So each of these laws are meant to separate Israel from the pagans. This is what the pagans did. They were always intermarrying, interbreeding, trying to mix things together. And God said, no, there's a reason I don't want you to do it. And the tassels, they were also there to distinguish Israel from other nations and how they dressed. They also reminded Israel of God's laws, the tassels on their robes. And then verse 13, talking about if any man takes a wife and then hates her and accuses her of misconduct. I took this woman. This is some guy that wants to get rid of his wife, and he's accusing her all of a sudden of not being a virgin when they got married. And in those days, that was extremely, extremely important. They had dowries, right? And the guy paid dad a big bunch of money for the wife, but now all of a sudden he's saying, hey, and so it's up to mom and dad to bring the evidence of her virginity to the priests, the elders, or the priests. And God just makes a way on how to resolve an accusation of deception in marriage. And First of all, he talks about a husband wanting to get rid of his wife, and so he falsely accuses her, and they have to bring the evidence. And then he talks about if the accusation against her happens to be true, then they bring out the woman and they stone her to death. She was not a virgin when they got married. She obviously, and she was in her father's house until she got married. So that's why it says she's done an outrageous thing in Israel by whoring in her father's house, disrespecting your father. That's a picture of Israel, right? Disrespecting their father. God said, he called Israel a whore many times, going after other gods, going after other nations. And so it was important to the Lord. Being faithful is important.
He didn't hold the men to those standards, just the women.
Yeah, they do. But this particular one here, this is talking about false accusations is what it's talking about. If a man falsely accuses his wife.
I'm saying, she has to be a virgin when she marries him. Does he have to be a virgin too?
No.
I have not read where he does, no.
See, they don't.
Right,
they don't
but
know
but women, but
We
we
weren't equal then.
no, we still aren't. But we have the children. We raise the children. We have the children.
Sort of.
We are the we are we carry the child. We are the mother, and so we are to be free from all potential sin, disease, anything, and I mean, yeah, men, but God knows what he's doing. So we were to
How
be.
many women don't know who the father is? Because they're doing what they're doing, and then the guy is like, why am I paying out or child support? It creates a lot of issues.
Yeah.
You know who your mother is. You don't always know the father.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you always know your mother. That's for sure. So the mother has to be above reproach. And still should be. And I know we don't hold that in high regard anymore, but it definitely should be. Verse 23 talks about.
One question. He cannot divorce her. It says in verse 19, and she shall be his wife. He cannot divorce her all of his days.
Right.
Boy, is that an uncomfortable situation? Because
You're thinking about it like today. In those days, it wasn't. No, in those days, remember, the Lord walked among them, and they knew it was a small, each tribe had their own judges in it. Everybody knew that you brought this accusation. Everybody knew that she is staying with you and you accused her. So anything you did is under the watchful eyes of everybody around you. So no, and God was very adamant about how people, later on, especially in the New Testament, how a man treats a wife. You're supposed to love her like Christ loved the church, right? And God doesn't hold with a man being abusive to a woman at all. And he didn't then, he doesn't, he's the same God. And so he puts these laws in place so that women cannot, would not be abused, would not be abused. If he did, they take him out and stone him. He would be rebellious and mean and take him out to the gate, and the elders say, and stone him. But in 22, if he's found with the wife of another man, both of them are going to die, right?
Yeah.
Both the man and the woman, not just the woman. God holds the man accountable, most certainly accountable. And this is what I was talking about before about the laws of rape here between 23 and 29. If you don't know If she's in the city and she cries out, it's the city's responsibility. It's interesting. They're held responsible in God's eyes. And he says, if that happens in your city, you bring them out, both of them to the gate and stone them to death. The young woman, because she did not cry out for help. She's in the city. And the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife. This is talking about somebody that was married. Purge the evil. But if it's in the open country, and then she's not held accountable, because she could scream and nobody would hear her because they're in the country. And so she was not, but the guy was punishable by death, but not her. And 28, if a man meets a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found out, the man has to pay a dowry to the father, 50 shekels of silver, and he has to take her as his wife, and he cannot divorce her. So that is protection. Because nobody, it wasn't easy to marry. Nobody wanted to marry you if you weren't a virgin. Then you became basically a prostitute, right? And so this is protection. If you rape somebody and you're found out, he has to marry you, and he has to pay money for you too. It's like, and then a man shall not take his father's wife, so that he does not uncover his father's nakedness. This would be a son marrying his stepmother after his father dies. It was considered like an incest at that time, and so that was not to happen.
Well, does that mean that they actually he actually married his father's wife, or does that just mean that they had
Relations? Yeah, relations. And or it was just considered incest, so it was not acceptable. And then chapter 23, no one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Eunuchs, they're not to enter the assembly. This is when the nation gathers before the Lord in worship. The leadership, in the sense of the leadership before the Lord, they may not be in office, in leadership office, when they gather before the Lord, because God's covenant with Israel was all about the seed, right? It was all about the seed. And so in leadership, when you're assembling before the Lord, the things that he was telling them, the most pertinent thing was the seed. And so the eunuchs were not allowed to be there. They were accepted by the Lord if they obeyed him. Isaiah, who's got Isaiah?
I do.
Isaiah 56, 3-5. Let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say, the Lord will surely exclude me from his people. And let no eunuch complain, I am only a dry tree. For this is what the Lord says, to the eunuch who keeps my Sabbaths, who choose what pleasures me and holds fast to my covenant, to them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever.
Yeah, so the Lord's saying, I'm gonna, if you're mine, it's eternal, right? And you'll have more than you would have with sons and daughters. Yeah, you can't have sons and daughters. But
74 virgins?
20, yeah.
74 virgins?
Yeah. But
when he gets to heaven.
It could be either or, if the pagan kings a lot of times made eunuchs in the palace to serve them, right?
Yeah.
Because they had a harem and they wanted guys in there that they could trust. So it could be born that way. It could be by accident, or it could have been one that was a pagan and forced into that because of service to the king. So, but God did. He said, "Yes, I'll accept you." And then in verse 2, he talks about someone born out of wedlock. or maybe a Jew and a pagan marrying together, that's forbidden. And they can't enter the assembly to the 10th generation. We're talking leadership assembly again.
That's the sins of the father go on to the children, to the 10th generation. So do we still think that?
No,
or
no, and
that
that's
was
not
just something for them?
No, this isn't the sins of the father, this is coming before the Lord in leadership,
Okay.
assembling before. No, if you're intermixed, remember God is so holy, everything in front of him is holy. And when you're in his presence, and so if you're intermixed, then to the 10th generation before you are now back to being that generation that you can stand there before
With
the Lord like
okay.
that. Then verse 3, Ammonites and Moabites, they may enter out in the 10th generation because they did not meet with you and give you bread and water when you came out of Egypt, because they hired Balaam. We just went through and remember they hired Balaam to try and curse Israel.
Yeah.
So the Moabites and the Ammonites, those were the two sons of Lot and his daughters. And so they were not to also be in that place for up to 10 generations. And then
I keep losing her.
oh, are you losing me, sis? Are you losing me, Carlene?
I don't think she can hear you. She
Oh.
looks like she's trying to.
Except, can you hear me, Carlene, or are you losing me? No?
Obvious, I think she can't hear you.
Hopefully she can.
Looks like it froze.
Are you still on airplane mode?
I can't hear you.
On my phone,
You
yeah.
can't,
but not
she
on-
just said,
You can't hear me?
no.
Oh, now I can,
Oh,
Now
okay.
you can? Oh, okay.
but you've been coming in and out through the most of this.
Oh, okay.
That's
I'll
why
just
it has
talk
been for
louder.
me. It's
Well,
been
I
in
don't
and
think-
out.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll talk
it's not-
louder. Does that help?
No, it's not that I can't hear you. It's just the internet has every once in a while takes you off and brings you on.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that pesky little charter spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's verse 7 and 8, you shall not abhor an Edomite, he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian because you were a sojourner in his land. Children born to them in the 3rd generation may enter the assembly of the Lord. So Jacob's brother was Esau, right? Jacob became Israel. So Jacob's brother Esau was the father of the Edomites. And so that's why in verse 7 he says not to abhor the Edomite. They are cousins. And because you were an Egyptian, you were in Egypt for so long, you're not to give Egyptians a bad time either, remembering where you came from. And then in verse 9, when you're encamped against your enemies, keep yourself from every evil thing. If you become unclean because of a nocturnal emission, go to the outside of the camp, and then bathe, and you can come back into the camp. And then he talks about a place outside of the camp where you dig a hole to use the facility outside there, the big hole, and be sure and cover it up. But this is a holy God, and God says, because I walk in the midst of the camp. So God is in the camp. So what I think about is what we do at home. It's like I have this thing about, I don't pray like when I'm in the shower or, in the bathroom or whatever, because I feel like God is too holy. I need to be covered, and I need to be in that place when I pray. And that's me. But it just comes from remembering that the Holy Spirit is right there, and he's in the midst. And I like to be in that place of respect when I pray. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you're in a place where you just like cry out to the Lord, or you've got so much turmoil going on in your house. it's the only place you can have some privacy, maybe, you know. But what he's telling them is that he's in the middle of their camp, and so anything that has to be done, go outside the camp to go to the bathroom, go outside the camp. If you have a nocturnal emission, which has nothing to do with us, but because the Lord your God, verse 14, walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and give up your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be holy. Our house must be holy. Our house is our camp. We don't bring in pornographic things. We don't bring in X-rated television movies and things like that. You keep your camp holy because the Lord is in the midst of our camp. So that for us, that's our home. And then in 17 and 18, he talks about prostitution and not engaging in it, nor ever using any money from it to bring to the house of the Lord to pay for a vow or anything like that. Don't, for us, it's gambling. Usually don't go gamble and win a bunch of money and then want to give it to the Lord. The Lord doesn't want it. I know I had a hard time with it for a while in the beginning.
You can't win the $1 million lottery and give it.
Right, you shouldn't be playing the lottery, yeah.
Well, I think somebody asked Jerry Falwell, would he take money from a gambler? He said, well, I don't mind accepting money on the devil's nickel.
No. Yeah, no, we're not to do that. God doesn't want us gambling, and he doesn't need any of our money, actually. He doesn't need any of it. He certainly doesn't want it when it's off the backs of somebody that could be, you know, having an issue and all that, and we're not to do that. And then he talks about charging interest on loans. Again, this is to your brothers and sisters in the Lord. For them, it was their brothers. No interest. You can charge a foreigner, but not your brother. And if you make a vow to the Lord, don't delay fulfilling it. God will require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. Be careful what you vow to the Lord. Well, you shouldn't be vowing anything, actually. Be careful to do what has passed your lips. If you voluntarily vowed to the Lord what you have promised with your mouth, that's easier to do than you think, right? Sometimes you say, Lord, and you say something and you're actually making a vow, and then you do it, and boy, you have to ask for forgiveness right away.
Isn't that where the little saying comes from, where it says, don't overload your mouth?
Don't overload your mouth.
Don't overload your mouth with what you're saying, because you eventually will have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So my grandma would say, don't overload your mouth, because sometimes you're not willing to pay with the price that you just spouted off with.
That grandma must have been reading the Bible. Yeah. No, that's very true. Yeah. I mean, and it's like I said, it's easy to do. Sometimes you just say stuff to the Lord, and you're not thinking that you're making a vow, you're vowing something, you break it, but he heard it. And so we have to be careful. Talking about going into your neighbor's vineyard. This was the welfare system. This was what Ruth did. This is what Jesus and his disciples did. You can eat your fill. Don't put it in your bag. If you go into your neighbor's grain, you can pluck the ears with your hand, but you don't bring a sickle and try and harvest any of it. So this was what Jesus was doing with his disciples. His thing that they had an issue with was he was doing it on Sabbath, but they were definitely allowed to do it. Great welfare system. So, yeah. You have enough, right? You've got a vineyard, you've got you harvest all your grapes, you've got plenty, and you don't go back and get what you didn't get the first time and leave it for the poor. They always have something to eat. And then 24, when a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her. This is sexual impurity, immorality, excuse me, indecency. He writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of her house. So divorce was allowed in Israel, but it was very carefully regulated. And it could not, you couldn't just simply dissolve a marriage. You had to go through this paper and you had to make sure that you put it in her hand. And there had to be a cause for you to get the paper. But it needed to be recognized legally, the divorce did. And, you know, God allowed it. He didn't command it. He hates divorce. He allowed it so that, what you were talking about, Joanne, so that a woman wouldn't be mistreated or in an abusive place. This was actually for the woman, not for the man. This was for the woman, so that she wouldn't be taken advantage of. But she would be found, there would be some sexual impropriety there. And it says that if she becomes another man's wife and the latter man hates her and he writes her a certificate of divorce and then he dies, her former husband may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled. That is an abomination before the Lord. You shall not bring sin upon the land. What is he talking about? This command is made because God wanted both marriage and divorce to be seen as very serious. They were coming out of a place where it was like a revolving door. I always say it was like Hollywood, where wives and husbands in and out, in and out. And if they thought, just let her go, I'll have my fun, and then I'll take her back later. God doesn't want, he wants it serious. Marriage is serious. Divorce is serious. God hates divorce because of what it does to the people that are involved in divorce. He knows the hurt that happens. He knows what goes on. And so he wants them to get it in their head that it's to be permanent. And just so it would strengthen the marriage as well, because they wouldn't be able to just, let her go and then take her back. But remember, they're becoming a nation and they have come out of pagan rituals, pagan thinking. And they were just, and Hollywood does, Hollywood's an example of that. I think Hollywood doesn't care. Whatever, and back and forth and whatever. And God just wants us to be serious. So, verse 6, no one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in a millstone. At that time was essential to them. They used it to grind their food and all. And so if somebody owed you something, you couldn't take their millstone as a collateral because it was their livelihood. If a man, verse 7, is found stealing one of his brothers, this is kidnapping, treats him like a slave or sells him, then the thief shall die. So this was kidnapping. God, you can't, if you kidnapped in God's economy, you died. You were stoned. Today we let people that kidnap get away with it. Well, they get punished, but they don't, not much, not enough. Take care, verse 8, in case of a leprous disease, to be very careful. Remember, you got to be careful so it wouldn't spread, so it wouldn't become a plague. Be careful to do what God told them to do.
Got it 3 times. So.
And then if you loan something to your neighbor, verse 10, don't go in his house to collect his pledge, his collateral. Stand outside, let him bring the collateral out to you. I like that. It reminds me, we say a man's home is his castle, right? But God treats that really, really respectful of another person's home. Even if they owe you something, you cannot go in. And here it tells you, if you take collateral from a poor man, it had to be received in a way that kept the poor man from, that he could still have his dignity. I like that. And if it was something that he used to keep himself warm at night, you had to return it to him so he could use it at night, because God didn't want him to be cold or freeze. So, and that's talking about collateral. How much mercy and grace were they to have over their neighbors? And so are we. We are to have that same kind of mercy and grace God has for us. God doesn't take away stuff that would cause us to be cold or hungry or whatever. And then in verse 16, fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. And we know that, right? Yeah, each one is their own sin. You shall not pervert, verse 17, the justice due to the stranger, the sojourner, or the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge. He's very protective. Israel, us too, remembering where we came from and where they came from, and that they were so blessed. They were to be compassionate to others. We came from we all came from sinful past, and as sinners, we are to be compassionate to those that are struggling. And so God says, I redeemed you, therefore I command you to do this. In verse 19, when you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf, don't go back and get it. Leave that for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. These are the ones God's taking care of. Isn't he? I'll bless you. You leave it for them. You give it to them. I'll bless you. Same thing with your olive trees. Don't go over them again. Leave them there. When you gather your grapes, don't strip it afterwards. It's going to be for the sojourner, fatherless, and widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this. So what love God has, man. He makes this beautiful welfare program that allows, these poor people and widows and stuff to be fed. And he requires a generous heart. He requires us to have a generous heart. And don't worry about it. Even if you have $10 and that's all you got, but you give somebody that's in trouble $1, God blesses you. He knows that was hard for you, but he turns around and blesses you. He always does. He always makes it easy. Not easy. He always makes it. He stretches your finances to get from point A to point B. And I don't know how he does it. Sometimes I say, Lord, I looked and there was $5 and now there's 15. How did that happen? I don't know, but he does it. He always does it. And it blows me away. So next week we'll be doing Deuteronomy 25 through 30. And Psalms 22. And by the way, if you came on YouTube, before we started our study, we did pray, we did do prayer requests, and we did worship in song to the Lord. We always do. And next week is 22, Psalms 22. 25 through 30 and 22. And then we're almost done with the book of Deuteronomy. And then we'll be in the book of John. We'll have a double John. I'm getting John over there. So Katie, if you'd be so kind to hit that. And, I love you guys. I know I miss seeing you.